Thank you so much for joining the PACE webinar, Community Schools in California, Aligning Systems to Support the Whole Child. We are so pleased to have with you here today experts on the issue of community schools in both research and practice, and going to share with you what we know from research and practice about how this really important approach can be used to support kids in California. So across California, in the wake of COVID-19, as we're currently responding to the crisis and thinking about how we will recover from the crisis, one of the things that has become abundantly clear is that students and families are hurting right now. With schools closed, many kids don't have access to the types of services, whether that's nutrition, health and welfare that they were getting at school, or just the safe place and the safe relationships with adults that schools may have provided to students. And so there's a call for schools to be providing much more of the kinds of wraparound supports that students need when they come back from school, so that schools can be that one-stop shop for kids who may have experienced trauma while schools are closed, or are coming back with huge levels of social, emotional, psychological, and academic need. So we're thrilled today to be able to highlight some of the best practice from research and from the field about how this approach can be integrated into our planning for crisis, response, and recovery. I would like to share with you who our speakers are going to be for today. So we have Hayan Kimner, who's an education research and policy consultant, Michael Essian, who's principal at Dr. Martin Luther King Middle School in San Francisco Unified School District, Anna Mayer, who's a research analyst and policy advisor with the Learning Policy Institute, and Jose Gonzalez, the Director of Community Schools Development for the Los Angeles County Office of Education. Our agenda for today will have two parts. In the first part, Hayan Kimner will talk about new research on community schools and how they can be thought of as a coronavirus recovery strategy. Michael Essian will give a response based on his deep knowledge about implementing these kinds of practices at a local school. And then Anna Mayer will talk about her recent research, leveraging resources through community schools, the role of technical assistance to provide some insight on the systems level thinking that can support local implementation. Then Jose Gonzalez will provide a response to that research, and we'll have ample time for Q&A. So just a couple of logistical notes. The first is that you'll see a Q&A box, and we would invite you to please type your questions and comments into this Q&A box. You can also vote on other people's entries, so that will determine which questions get asked and answered first. Also, you can monitor it. If the questions can be answered in text, our speakers will go in and answer questions. You can also find slides and links to resources on our PACE event page. And just a heads up that the video recording from this webinar will be posted online early next week. So without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Hayan Kimner, who is going to discuss what community schools look like and how they can be used as a force for recovery. Hayan?
Both. Thanks, Heather. Good afternoon, everyone. Really glad to be here. Wanted to at least start with a definition. Hold on, here we go. When we're talking about a community school, we're talking about a whole child, whole family approach to teaching and learning. And I think that sometimes the clickbait of community schools are the service-based components, and that's oftentimes the draw. But unlike co-located or wraparound programs, a successful community school is one that is deeply investing in transforming the core instructional practice and relationships within each classroom and school. And when we consider what is most essential to good teaching and learning, there is a silver lining to COVID craziness. And when we look at the calamity that COVID has brought on communities, school communities, and families across the nation and the globe, there was a moment of clarity. It was such a human response for teachers and other education leaders to jump right in immediately, in many cases to protect and sustain what they considered to be the fundamental aspects of teaching and learning and their relationships with their students. These same things, I believe, and community school leaders like Principal Essien will talk about a little bit later, are the integral investments in a successful and sustainable community school. So what is that? What are those most essentials? One is the centrality of family and student relationships, integrated teacher and student supports, collaborative leadership and practice, and student-centered learning. Now let's just go through those quickly. When we're talking about the centrality of family and student relationships, and we think about COVID, the new realities of distance learning, families are widely regarded as now essential partners in continuing their children's education. This means long-term trusting relationships with families is essential to supporting student learning. This isn't true in times of crisis. Engagement has not been narrowly focused on parent-teacher conferences, family resource centers, or parent-focused skill building. It's really about creating those strong, trusting relationships. Second, when we think about integrated and teacher and student supports, this is where folks, I think, are drawn most immediately to community schools. What are the things that we can get? And yes, for sure, the magnitude of the social, economic, and health traumas for students and families has made even more clear the interdependence between health and learning. Certainly, especially in California, this underscores the need for more counselors, social workers, school nurses, and leveraging the funding and resources of other youth-serving partners, which Anna will speak more about. But it also means being proactively attuned and responsive to the basic social emotional needs of students and staff, creating dedicated time and space for checking in and demonstrating basic care. The other piece about successful community schools is it's not just about support providers and specialists coming in to take care of problems. There's a cohesive team approach to supporting students, families, and teachers to build their skills and efficacy in their relationships with students. Third, collaborative leadership and practice. Schools and districts that had already invested in a distributed community approach to ownership of schools and student supports. During the initial response of COVID-19, there was a collective sense of immediate action and responsibility. For those communities, the relational infrastructure was already in place to have an immediate response. Now is the time for schools and districts to facilitate conversations with their communities, to organize and plan their work, and to make use of the formal and informal resources within the community. But it's also important to remember that collaboration isn't a value. It doesn't just happen. To do it well, someone has to be the dedicated lead. Community schools have a dedicated administrator who serves as a resource manager or, in many ways, a chief of staff to ensure alignment and coordination and to be a key administrative partner with the principal. The fourth is student-centered learning. Community schools are first and foremost schools. The goal is academic learning. We can't ever forget that. Now, there has been amazing innovation in teaching and learning in some schools and districts over the last several months. Some, in times that have not been characterized by a pandemic, have called these strategies deeper learning strategies, but basically teaching that is student-centered, personalized learning, student-owned learning, competency-based learning, and anytime, anywhere learning. This also means getting student feedback on instruction, thinking of opportunities for student-led training for educators and other school staff. Young people are resources. Young people are educators. This also means working with enrichment and youth development partners to support and strengthen social emotional learning opportunities as part of our new Weird School Day. These partners can support specific teachers and classrooms to ensure that students are actively engaged and connected to a caring adult. So when we think about these foundational elements of a successful coronavirus response strategy, those are the foundational elements of a community school strategy. All of these are largely within the locus of control and tight budgets of most school systems and communities. I think now in this time, we should really hold on to the idea that all schools can and should be community schools. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Hayan. So Michael Essien, the principal of Dr. Martin Luther King Middle School in San Francisco Unified School District, please unmute and put on your video so that we can hear about how you're implementing some of these practices locally. Michael, can't hear you yet.
Can you hear me?
We can. We don't see your video yet, though.
I don't seem to have that option on my screen anymore.
Okay, well, why don't you go ahead and start talking, and we'll have our tech team work on that.
Right. So good afternoon. So when we are looking at any school site, trying to address the needs that exist for our students and families that attend, we've often reduced our conversations to looking at academic scores, academic performance scores, and or sense of belonging in terms of suspensions and referrals. And when we've tried to address those things, we found that many of the issues that were impacting academic scores and the sense of belonging were issues that were beyond the classroom or outside the classroom. And so when we start talking about or thinking about ways for us to begin to address the needs of our students and families, the community school model provided the nuance that allowed us to think about how we can begin to address the needs. So it was the community school model that allowed us to focus in on the whole child, because any child that comes to our school site, that child is not just about their academics. That child comes from a family, that child comes from a community, and what is occurring in the family and in the community is also being brought to the school site. So then how do we create a system that can address all of those needs, because those things are impacting the child as they sit inside of each and every one of our classrooms. So with the community school model, what we ended up thinking about is, with this model, we have to create a structure that is going to allow the adults in the building to move and deliver services to the students and families that we have. And so what you're looking here is a particular structure designed to deliver the community school model to the students and the families that we have here. The cabinet team, as you can see, is the team that sits over and holds the community schools model. And you can see that cabinet team sits over administration and systems. The cabinet team is designed to deal with a variety of issues. This team looks at the bigger pictures. Let me go back one slide. When you start thinking about the bigger issues around shared vision and leadership, matching hopes and needs, continuous learning, these are the big ideas that exist within the community school framework. And then we have 5 buckets of work that we engage in. So we talk about behavioral health and wellness, college, career and transition, expanded learning, family partnerships. But I want to pay close attention to teaching and learning, because in the model that we have for community schools, teaching and learning is the emphasis. So as you think about the big ideas and the 5 buckets of work that we're doing, everything is being funneled to support the student and the teacher inside the classroom so that we can deliver results. So this is where you start looking at the design, the structure. And so with our cabinet team, which consists of the community school coordinator chairs this team, and the assistant principal, the principal, we have teachers and people from our student support department, our social workers. They are part of the team that sits over and advises administration systems around what needs to occur with respect to the framework. And in this team, if you look off over to the left, you see the North Stars. The North Stars are the things that drive what the community school model is implementing. So these North Stars are whole child, student voice, sense of belonging, and rigorous learning. These are designed in that specific order. When you start thinking about, if we're going to do the whole child allows us to think about the child beyond just in the school. And in order for us to get information, that means we need to communicate with the child and the family. This is where student voice comes in. And as we communicate with with the child and the family, and we use their voice, that increases a sense of belonging. And when children and families feel like they belong, then it's more easy for us to address the rigorous learning. So we input the North Stars into the cabinet team, and those North Stars are dispersed throughout the entire system so that we can deliver rigorous learning and support teaching and learning within the school. And if you look at the structure, I want you to take a look at the lead team. The lead team is when we pull together the people from the ILT. The ILT stands for the Instructional Leadership Team, and the Culture Club. The CC is the Culture Club. These individuals are responsible for instruction. The ILT team delivers PD and trainings around instruction in the classroom, what we choose to focus in on. But the Culture Club in particular does adult behavior. How do adults move in the building so that adults can create a culture that is responsive to the needs of students, that is responsive to the needs of families? So when you see the lead team being composed of the ILT and the Culture Club, we're now putting instruction and adult practices into the PD to support our entire teaching staff. And when you look at the overall structure from the cabinet team, you can see that those North Stars are inputted into the ILT and the Culture Club so that we can deliver whole child, student voice, sense of belonging, and rigorous learning within our PD. This allows for us to now train the entire staff within the community schools framework around the things that we say are valuable and important to meet the needs of our students and families. So yes, like what is whole child? The whole child framework deals with an interaction or interdependence between the child, the home, and the school. And the community school framework is just situated within this triangular relationship that exists between the child, the home, and the school. And if you look, there are three particular circles. I want to highlight the issue around agency. Agency is the one area that we are really looking to develop because we feel that agency is where individuals choose to make decisions based upon their best interest. So when we start looking at student voice, when we find out what students need, when we find out what families need, and we find out what teachers are needing, we try to provide that and support them in being independent learners, making choices within their own framework to make sure that they can get their needs met. And when people are acting in ways that they're acting on their agency, what we find out is that people then begin to push the system because they can make demands on what they need, and then the system can respond to those needs. What does this look like? When we start talking about the child itself, this is the framework that we share with teachers. So teachers are looking at this as well. So when we start thinking about the child, the whole child, and when it comes to these three particular circles, the community, the agency, and the academics, we need to be sure that the teacher is aware of this as well as the child, because we want to be transparent in the things that we do, because we need all individuals to be aware of the expectations and the supports so that they can make decisions that are in their best interest. Same goes for the teacher as well. Now that we have the frameworks, now we get into the details, like what is actually happening at the school site? How is the community school framework delivering services to teachers and to students so that we can focus in and improve instructional outcomes? This is what's occurring. The child is centered in our instructional focus, and you can see there's some things above and below, and you see below it's the B for Blooms. So we're talking about arts integration and project-based learning. But up above, we have Maslow's. We're talking about de-escalation training, restorative practices, PAC's good behavior game, which is a trauma-informed practice used to reduce issues inside of the classroom. When we implement these things within the community school model framework, where we're adding whole child, student voice, sense of belonging, and rigorous learning, what we found is that we are getting people who are very responsive to these things, because now we have redefined relationships. One of the challenges that we often find in education when we try to move data, when we try to actually improve outcomes, that people go to these PDs and trainings that deal with individuals looking at, if the teacher just did X, then we will get Y. And over time, we've noticed that that has not occurred. What we've decided to do within the community school framework is we said we need to change relationships in the building. And if we change the relationships, we're talking about specifically the relationships between the student and the teacher. How do we change that relationship? One, we have to change the power dynamic. That power dynamic is changed by listening, by incorporating student voice. When you listen to students and their needs, when you listen to parents and their needs, then it becomes easier for them to not only feel like they belong to the school, but it also becomes easier for us to begin to design ways to address those needs. But more times than not, the things that students and families communicate to us are beyond the classroom. And so how do we get beyond the classroom to support those needs? That's my community school coordinator. The community school coordinator, when doing the needs assessment and finding out the needs of the students and the families, begins to look for agencies that can fill those specific needs. And when finding those agencies who can fit those needs, we just need to figure out how do we get them into the building so they can begin to deliver services to the students and to the families while education is happening during the day program. And what I mean by happening during the day program, many of the agencies that we partner with, they go into the classroom with the student to deliver services and or provide specific training to teachers to deliver specific services to students and families. And so I'm going to give you a glimpse of the various agencies that partner with us that allows us to deliver this community school framework model to our students and families. When you begin to look at the funding sources for schools, limited funding is provided for us to deliver the services that we need to our students and families. But within this particular framework, and when doing a needs assessment, we're able to then find the agencies that can fit the needs or serve the needs of our students and families and our teachers. And so what you see here are the various agencies that we partner with. There are over 50 different agencies that we partner with to deliver services, and they're all funneled through this community schools model to support the teaching and the learning. And we believe that it is through this framework that allows us to look at different agencies to bring them into the school and deliver services. And what we see here, folks, is we estimated $2.3 million of services that are free brought into the school, delivered to our students through the community school model, bringing in agencies in the city and from the county to deliver services. This flexibility is only provided through this community school model, and we believe that we are making a huge impact delivering the things that our students and families need at MLK Middle School. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Principal Essien, and thanks to all of you putting questions in the question box. We will be addressing these after our next two presenters. So I'd like to invite Anna Mayer from the Learning Policy Institute to turn on her video and audio and share with us some lessons about some of the systems and supports that can be put into place to advance community schools at scale.
Excellent. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, I'm really glad to be here today, and thanks to everyone for the great questions. I was getting sucked into the Q&A box, but I'll turn my attention back here. I'm really happy to be here today, and I appreciate the really rich grounding that Hayen and Michael shared in terms of what a comprehensive community school looks like on the ground. And what I'm going to do today is to help us zoom out to more of the 10,000 foot level, maybe not the 30,000 foot level, but to zoom out a little more to think about what can it look like to put systems level supports into place. See if I can advance my slides. Great. So I'm going to be talking a bit about the role that technical assistance can play in supporting community schools. And I'm going to be sharing some new research on that topic, but that research is really grounded in a 2017 report, which you see pictured here, which was looking at over 140 studies of outcomes associated with community schools. And one important finding from that report, perhaps not surprising, is that implementation matters. And specifically, longer operating and better implemented community schools get better results. So this leads us to an important question that has not been well studied, which is, what does high quality implementation look like in community schools? And then of course, what kinds of supports are needed to get to that high quality implementation? And national conversations often identify technical assistance as a structure that can support the implementation, the expansion, and the sustainability of community school initiatives. So that is what led LPI to look further into this topic of technical assistance for community schools. Before jumping into the details about the research that we did, I just want to start off by defining what I mean when I say technical assistance. So more broadly, technical assistance is the process of providing targeted supports to build the capacity of individuals and organizations. That can take different forms. For networks of community schools, which are typically district-level initiatives, this can mean a few things. One is the professional development and coaching, which is available for district and school staff. There can also be strategic planning support, which typically happens at the district level. And another element of technical assistance can be partnership development, and that includes direct staffing at school sites, on-campus service provision, funding support, all things that happen at schools when community school partnerships are in place. I'll also add that different entities are able to offer technical assistance. For example, districts themselves may have the internal capacity to do so. In California, that's the case for Los Angeles Unified and Oakland Unified, which both have their own community school initiatives. States can fund technical assistance. For example, New York State funds several regional centers that provide technical assistance to local community school initiatives. And county agencies or other regional level organizations can also offer technical assistance. And that's the focus of the research that I'm going to be sharing today. What you see pictured here is a recent policy brief from LPI, which features examples from 2 California counties that are providing technical assistance for community schools, and that is LA County and Alameda County. We based this brief on interviews with a number of different practitioners, and we were examining the question of how counties can connect and support productive networks of community schools. So one of the initiatives that we looked at was in LA County. And of course, LA County is a big place. It has a number of different community school initiatives, both within LA Unified as well as within the broader county. And what we looked at was a community school pilot initiative, which is being led by the LA County Office of Education and involves 15 districts in LA County, each with 1 high school participating. And we're very fortunate today to have Jose Gonzalez joining this conversation, who is leading this pilot work for LA County. So I will leave it up to him to share the details of that work in just a moment. But I will just note that each of the schools participating in the pilot have a full-time coordinator and a full-time family outreach worker on site. And as you can see here, there are a number of different county offices and nonprofit partners who are participating in this work. The LA County Department of Mental Health is helping to fund the school staff in the pilot through the State Mental Health Services Act. And I will leave the additional details up to Jose to share. The other county that we looked at is Alameda County. And we looked at 2 different organizations that are supporting community school initiatives in Alameda County. The first is the Alameda County Healthcare Services Association, which is the home to the Center for Healthy Schools and Communities. The Center for Healthy Schools and Communities supports district initiatives in Oakland Unified and Hayward Unified, New Haven Unified, and other districts within Alameda County. A couple examples of the way that it supports these initiatives includes oversight of 28 school-based health centers throughout the county. These centers offer health screenings, reproductive health care, immunizations, and dental care, among other supports. The center also has a school-based behavioral health initiative at 170 schools, which is about 40% of the schools in the county. And through that initiative, schools get access to mental health consultations for students and staff. And they also receive support for implementing a coordination of services team that brings together a collaborative group of stakeholders to make sure that students are connected with services that can support their learning. The center also employs or supports district-level health and wellness leads in 14 of the 18 school districts in Alameda County. The other organization that we looked at in Alameda County is the Seneca Family of Agencies, which is an important nonprofit partner supporting this work. Seneca runs the Public School Partnership Program that partners with districts to support inclusive special education and mental health services. And Seneca's approach to technical assistance is grounded in its unconditional education model, which is a version of a multi-tiered system of support, or MTSS. Unconditional education focuses on helping students with disabilities to learn in inclusive settings and avoid overly restrictive placements. And it's grounded in broader work on school redesign. So that includes a focus on school climate. So I think that gets to what Hayan was saying earlier, that community schools really are about a transformational approach to education. And the services and supports that I'm talking about are an important piece of that puzzle. Two elements we learned about that are key to implementing Seneca's unconditional education approach. One is the partnerships that Seneca establishes with other child-serving systems, including county mental health, social welfare, and juvenile justice. This allows Seneca to access funding, including Medi-Cal and the State Mental Health Services Act. Another important element of implementation is that Seneca places unconditional education coaches at school sites. And these coaches essentially function as community school coordinators who build capacity through resource mapping, identifying funding sources, leading a coordination of services team, providing professional development to teachers, and facilitating data-driven intervention cycles. So there is much more to say about the rich work that's happening with both of these organizations, but for the sake of time, I will move on to some of the key lessons learned. So several key lessons emerge from our analysis of these initiatives. The first is that cross-sector partnerships at the county level can bring a comprehensive set of resources to schools. These partnerships can go beyond the traditional educational domain. You heard me mention public health, mental health, juvenile justice, Parks and Rec was on the slide for the LA County pilot. So this can really be a comprehensive whole child conversation. And coordinator positions at the county, district, or school level can help to develop these partnerships, and they can also help with blending and braiding the funding streams that enable this work through different sources. These cross-sector partnerships are strengthened by having a shared vision and clear agreements among partners. The shared vision could include a common cause, like addressing homelessness, or a joint goal, such as supporting children's healthy development. And spelling out these partnership agreements through MOUs or other forms of documentation can be helpful. And lastly, you heard me mention several times the approach of having a multi-tiered system of support, or MTSS, and a coordination of services team, or COST. Both of these are common strategies that can help partners to coordinate, deploy, and target their resources effectively at school sites. I will just close by saying that we obviously are finding ourselves in a moment when California families are under a lot of stress due to COVID-19, as well as California educators, and it's more important than ever to find ways to build on existing services and partnerships that schools are able to offer. So one thing to keep in mind with these examples I've shared is that in many cases, it's about finding ways to partner more productively and efficiently, and to pull together existing services in a way that really is centered on the child. I think the PACE brief that Hayan wrote really demonstrates that marshaling these resources can support high quality teaching and learning in schools. And the examples in the LTI brief show that counties are well positioned to form cross-sector partnerships and leverage a variety of funding streams. One thing to keep in note is that this year's state budget includes $45 million for a community schools partnership program that could help to support this type of work. Districts interested in this work could also look at their use of federal relief dollars, since CARES funds are allowed to begin or deepen investments in community schools. So with that, I will turn things back over, perhaps to Heather.
Indeed, thank you so much, Emma. So Jose Gonzalez, Director of Community Schools Development for Los Angeles County Office of Education. Please turn on your video and your sound so that we can hear about how you're implementing this in LA County.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Video's on. We're good? We're good. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to share our work. My name is Jose Gonzalez. As mentioned, I'm the Director over Community Schools with the Los Angeles County Office of Education. And I have the privilege in supporting the community schools implementation across 15 high schools throughout LA County. We just finished our first year at being at the school sites, but the planning for this work has been going on for a while at the County Office of Education level. This work is due to our LACO superintendent's drive to ensure that we are able to meet the needs of those with the highest needs. Our superintendent, Dr. Deborah Eduardo, has made community schools one of her top priorities in an effort in addressing inequities across LA County. The number one ask from district leaders to our superintendent has been the need for more resources at the school. So our superintendent met with LA County department directors to share this ask by school districts. Many departments stepped forward to join in the effort. What started as a grassroots movement quickly moved to a motion by our LA County Board of Supervisors as a diversion program and a way to strengthen the initiative in an effort of securing resources at the schools. This has led to an extensive collaboration efforts between our county departments, LACO departments, and nonprofits, and finding ways to connect resources to those most in need, which are at the school site. This is the strength of the work, the partnerships. Working very closely with our county departments and our LACO departments has been very helpful. We have been very fortunate to have the Department of Mental Health be one of the first departments to step up and support with funding and training. Most of the funding comes from Prop 63 and the Mental Health Services Act, as well as philanthropy, which supported with seed money to get this in motion. Extensive training has been done at the school level on trauma-informed care, and well-being practices has been delivered to our schools just as a way to get this work done at a foundational level. The districts that we are working with have been identified based on public health data and school data. We looked at a number of underrepresented students, graduation rates in the school and the district, suspension and attendance rates. We also looked at community factors such as education index and violent crimes in the community. Overall, in the schools that we serve, 78% of our students qualify for free and reduced price meals, which is 2 times higher than in some adjacent schools and districts. We are supporting schools in the Antelope Valley Union High School District, Azusa, Baldwin Park, Bassett, Bellflower, Compton, Duarte, Inglewood, Linwood, Montebello, Norwalk, La Mirada, Paramount, Pomona, and Santa Monica. While the motto may seem like a simple idea, make the school the hub for students and families, unfortunately, sites have limited staff that can focus on this work. Critical to our motto is having each school staffed with a dedicated coordinator and a parent engagement liaison. These are LACO employees assigned to work at the identified schools. The coordinator is charged with being the dedicated staff member to coordinate programs, partnerships, trainings, and establishing a local advisory council at each site. Our parent engagement liaison primary focus is supporting parent community engagement and making sure we have their voice represented at the school site. The feedback I have received from administrators as the first year completed has been unbelievably positive. They have been aware of the need for this support at the school site. Unfortunately, they have limited capacity, limited staffing to able to dedicate the time that this requires. As mentioned, community voice is critical. We want to ensure that parents and students are part of the process, and we know that the resources that are being connected to the school site are really, in fact, what the school site needs. Each school has established an advisory council with various stakeholders. They come together and bring their individual capacities to support with aligning and integrating different partners. Having these systems has helped to support schools as they were all closed due to the pandemic. The advisory council that was established quickly transitioned, someone formed, became almost like an emergency response team at the school site. One thing that we learned as a result of the pandemic and schools being closed, the critical need for resources at the school site to families. Where we had the data that we gathered prior to school closures, we had a total of 223 referrals to different partners. Following school closures, that increased to 1,167. So this only signifies the importance of making sure that our schools are connected, our families are connected, and are be able to access the resources that are needed. And now, as we move forward, we know that schools will open the school year in a distance model. We will continue to provide the same level of support and also support with reentry. We are providing leaders with training on how to welcome staff during these uncertain times. We are working with teachers on how supporting them with reentry will be needed as they welcome students, and also really engaging, helping set up critical conversations on how to respond to racial injustice and implications on the school, and really how to cope with stress and anxiety during these difficult times, and how to support students and families. We have learned a lot in this first year of implementation. I've previously had the privilege of being a school principal with LA Unified and had this model in place in implementing this framework. So I'm aware of firsthand of the benefits. Now that I'm working with the County Office of Education and supporting in a larger system, it's unbelievably important, critical that we're able to leverage the resources and being able to bring partners together and help facilitate those conversations that maybe weren't happening at a level where schools could be part of those discussions. So we've been very fortunate to be able to bring county partners, county departments, our own LACO departments, nonprofits, CBOs, and schools together to really identify resources and partnerships that can help in the school, help connect the school to these resources. So we're really excited about the opportunities that are in front of us and how we can bring this model to more school sites and the district as we move forward. This will be a critical focus of our efforts, really making sure that our schools are connected. We're supporting them, navigating through the process of really helping with the transformation of a community school. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So I would like to ask all of our panelists to turn back on their videos and their microphones at this time. And thank you to the panelists for answering questions in the Q&A box. Keep them coming to our audience. And a reminder that if you have questions or comments, please put them there in that Q&A box. I'm going to raise up some of the themes that were consistent across many of the questions, even some of the things that were already answered that I think might be nice to elaborate on in the whole group. So the first question that I would like to raise up to our panelists is one about how this model that you've laid out, which is so comprehensive and provides so much interconnection between different services, but really relies on an in-person model, the school as a place where children are. How should we be thinking about how you can still reach kids while maybe they're working remotely or while schools are open and then closed, and our normal delivery is disrupted. So Michael, maybe we can start with you.
I think that's a great question. What I will say is when there was a shift to the distance learning when schools were closed, I think this is when like the unintended structures within the community school model came into play. Thinking about how the school was designed, at the core, the school is connected to homerooms. So when it came time to connect with families, because now kids were at home and teachers were at home, the homeroom teachers were able to connect with the families, find out what they needed. And because we had an ongoing relationship with families, when we were asking questions around food and housing insecurities, et cetera, these were not strange questions and people didn't think that we were prying because we had established an ongoing relationship as a school that's actually trying to meet those needs. So instead of the kids being in the building and the families being in the building, we were able to record information, and then others outside of the classroom, some of our agencies, we partnered with Beacon, my community school coordinator, and some administrators, volunteer teachers. We then proceeded to do what was called connecting with families and address their needs. So we're talking about delivering food, not only just groceries, gift cards, but what other things that families might need, clothes, detergent. So those things became a priority as opposed, because we were dealing with the crisis as opposed to the instruction. But even within the instruction, there was an emphasis at our school site around the sense of belonging. And that was because of the community schools model where we felt that it's always around the sense of belonging that allows us to address other areas.
Yeah, that makes good sense. And Jose, do you have anything to add about how, in a county the size of LA County, this switch to virtual has disrupted the community schools support and work, and how you're working around that challenge?
Yeah, I think similar to what Michael said, the initial reaction from the schools and the schools teams was just to make sure that students were able to access the curriculum. They had access to a device, they had access to internet. Once they got that sorted out, they quickly realized that there was a different need. Families may possibly be in need of food, some basic services, food insecurity. So really our teams worked at different ways, but ultimately what they all did was just really contact families as many as possible, set up systems to really identify what were some of the needs, provide resources, really working with our 211 LA County resource network, and just making sure that we were able to connect them to what was needed. So I think that was a lot of the focus to really just support and really understand where some of the needs of the community and why students weren't engaged. I mean, that was something that was consistent throughout the schools that we're working with, that as hard as teachers were trying, students maybe not were connecting for various reasons. So just really exploring and understanding what some of those needs were is really where we wrapped ourselves around and focused on.
So Hayan and Anna, I would like to direct this question to you. It's a systems question in thinking about cost. So some of our participants are looking at the plans that have been laid out here and thinking, how could we possibly do this in a situation where we're facing increased costs from protective equipment or sanitization, in addition to budget hits that we might be taking? So what are the cost implications of implementing a community schools model, and how can we think about that in the current context? Hayan, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I was looking at you, Anna, but I'm happy to answer that question, or at least try to respond. I think one of the fundamental things that we have yet to totally grasp from a policy level is that when we're talking about schools and we're talking about, even when we talk about whole child education, we talk about the achievement gap and the opportunity gap, that cannot rest solely on education budgets, period. There is not enough money in California for our schools to do the basic work around high quality teaching and learning. So if you look at the student expenditures across the nation and you look where California is, you cannot do community schools work without having some basic adequacy when it comes to school funding. In addition, I think when we're talking about the resources that are available within the public space, this is not just education dollars. This is health and human services dollars. This is Medicaid dollars. This is nutrition. Talking about the work in justice, there's been a lot of conversations around how to redefine and redeploy ways that we think about school safety, culture, and climate in schools. I think we need to have the conversation at a systems level and not expect schools and districts to have to both foot the bill as well as hold the responsibility and accountability for them. Alex Briscoe from the California Children's Trust says, that's like salt in the wound. You can't give them not enough money to begin with and then ask them to do all these things and then ask them to contract out for services with the little money that they do have. So I think that is a basic piece that we need to think through. And I think the second piece is that a lot of what makes the relationships work within community schools don't require more money. They require leadership like that of Principal Essien and others that are in schools across this state. Whether you call them community schools, improvement schools, distributed leadership schools, these are places where teachers feel respected and valued as professionals and are given the opportunities to really refine their craft. And that is to really focus on the centrality of student and family relationships. And I think that is a lot of what roots the work at MLK. Anna?
Yeah, I would agree with that, Anne. And I think particularly the issue of cross-sector partnerships is really what we were trying to explore in the LPI brief. And I think that in the brief, we put together a one-page graphic, which hopefully does justice to representing the work that Jose is leading. But I think it's quite amazing to see that there are over a dozen different LA County departments involved in the pilot initiative. And of course, not every county is LA County, but every county has a variety of departments that are trying to serve children and families. So I think that part of the conversation can be an opportunity around collaboration, around more effectively leveraging resources. You heard me mention the State Mental Health Services Act several times. There are some funding streams that are not always being utilized fully to serve students in schools. And the same goes for Medi-Cal. There's a lot of federal matching dollars that are being left on the table. So I think it's about adequacy of funding, absolutely. And we are in a very hard moment right now, but it's also about looking both at the practices and structures that educators have control over at the school level, and then also what are those funding streams that can be leveraged more effectively through partnerships. And I would just briefly add that in the research review from LPI back in 2017, we documented a number of cost-benefit studies of community schools. There's a small number, maybe around 5 or 6, but really making the point that when you do start to build these partnerships and relationships, you can bring additional resources to school sites. And so you can look at it both as a cost, but you can also look at it as a value added that is bringing resources to the students and families.
Thank you so much to both of you. Jose, I'd like to ask for you to answer a question that has come up about outcomes, student outcomes. So specifically, what does LA County measure and track? But more generally, how should we be thinking about the outcomes that we would like to see as a result of the community schools approach?
So we're using similar to the outcomes we set to identify the districts. We're hoping to improve graduation rates, suspensions rates, attendance rates, family and community engagement. But I think what I keep saying that's critical, something to what's been mentioned, is the partnerships, the linkage to the services. I think that's going to be new data that districts don't have. and or haven't been capturing the way we're trying to capture it. And the idea is really to inform the public as to when you connect an agency, when you connect a provider, you get this result. So that's really what we're trying to add, that's besides the academic measures that we're hoping to improve, really looking at see the impact on these partnerships and services. Just like I shared that prior to schools closing, we had 223 referrals. Well, once schools closed, that number jumped to over 1,100. So there's a data point right there that's critical that maybe possibly wasn't there if the model wasn't in place. So we're hoping to capture that type of data to really help and inform, help and guide policy.
Thank you so much. So in our small number of minutes left, I want to acknowledge the kind of tone of several of our comments, which is what you've laid out here is so comprehensive and so interconnected. And is it possible for me to do it as a school superintendent, as a district leader? Are there pieces of this that we could start with? Are there pieces that we could isolate or prioritize? And so I would like to ask each one of you to think about and then answer, what's the advice that you have to school and district leaders for what they should do first? What's the first step? What's the most important thing to do right now if what you've laid out as the vision is what they're working toward? So I'm going to put Michael on the spot first, since, as a school-based leader, this maybe is a question you've thought about before.
So yes. The first thing I would say is people would need to stop viewing community schools from a deficit lens, that community schools is beneficial to all children, all families, regardless of neighborhood and regardless of income. More times than not, we view it as, for the children who are most marginalized. The way community schools are designed, you're meeting the needs of the students and the families, and those needs vary from place to place. So I do believe that has to change. If they see it as a strategy to deliver services to students and families, then I think we can begin to reshape how we think school should look when we deliver teaching and instruction to our students.
Thank you. Jose, can you add?
Yeah, I think we have to really shift from the traditional view that we have of schools of only being set up to provide instruction. I think we really have to make that transformation of the community school being the hub, the center, that we know that students are more than likely going to access the services if they're provided at the school, versus referring them out to a place that might be far away or not easily accessible. So I think it starts there with the transformation, the belief from all at the school site, not just the leadership, but really the belief that the school can be the hub, that can be open beyond the school day. So it's really that idea of making it the center for families. And I think it starts there. And once you start there, I think that belief of different programs, partnerships will facilitate coming along, because it's complicated. It's not easy having to go through the MOUs that districts have to go through, the partnership agreements, things like that. But I think it really starts with that belief of providing the best support possible for families.
Thank you so much. So Anna and Hayan, you each have 30 seconds. So really quick, what's the next step? Anna, can you start?
Sure. Well, what my mind jumped to is that and often a first step for community schools is to conduct a needs assessment and asset map. And the asset is really important, as Michael was saying. What are the resources in the community? What are the strengths? What are the needs? And I think that's more important than ever in this time of COVID. All schools should be having those conversations. Where are we at? What do our students and families need in order to be successful? And I think that's a first step that anyone can take.
Thank you so much. And Hayan, you get the last word.
Sure. I think that fundamentally we are in a time of everybody needing to be very realistic about healing. This is not just about COVID. The racial injustice, that our young people and our families and our communities are facing, that our teachers are experiencing, the secondary trauma that they experience in the classroom. We have to understand that. You can't bring services in if people don't trust you. You can't build strong instructional relationships if people don't feel like you have their best interests at heart. That's one. The second thing is vote. 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 Please vote.
Well, on that note, thank you all for your inspiration today. Thank you to all of the attendees for joining us to talk today about a really promising strategy for healing for California and all of our students over the many months ahead where we need to be addressing this and supporting our kids. Thank you all very much. You'll be able to find the slides and materials on our website, and join us again for another event soon.
Thank you, everyone.